What's going on, guys? This is the project part 2 on the 2014 RXPX 260, and today we are going to be installing the bilge pump as promised. This video is going to be exclusively on how to install a bilge pump. I know a lot of people ask this, and I did make a video earlier in the year showing the process of installing it but not actually doing it, so there were some questions that went unanswered, and that's what this is going to be here for today. So just kind of give you a breakdown of the things that you will need. Now, I am using a SeaFlo 750 automatic. That means it has a float built into it. This process will be pretty much universal for any bilge pump you choose to go with. Rule is another good brand a lot of people like to use. I go with SeaFlo just because, you know, I've used them for years. They seem to be pretty reliable and they're easy to work on if I ever need to. Very straightforward. So this is the Rule 750 automatic. It's a 12-volt pump, and you can see that there are 3 wires. I'll get to the wire process, but if you listen, that is the built-in float, so I'll show you that in just a moment. We also have the outlet kit. Now, the 750 is a 3/4 inch, which means it uses 3/4 inch hose and a 3/4 outlet. If you go with a 1100, you're going to need to go to 1 1/4 inch, I believe it is, or just over 1 inch. Either way, the pumps will tell you what the outlet size is. Now let's see if it says it on here. No, this is just for the fuse rating. Either way, when you buy the pumps, they do tell you what size they need. Next, we are going to need some low voltage wire. Now, I'm using this because the wire that the pump comes with is not going to be long enough to reach where we need to. So standard low voltage wire will work. This is 18 gauge. Any 18 gauge, 14 gauge, 16 gauge, that's all perfectly fine. It's a very, very low amperage pump, so it doesn't really matter. You just don't want to go too small, you know, 22, 24. That's where you're going to run into a problem. So that's our wire. We're also going to need some crimps. Obviously, to extend the wire, we're going to need some butt connectors, but we're also going to need some ring terminals to tap into the battery, because we will be tapping into the battery in this process. We're also going to need a fuse, inline fuse tap. You basically just kind of cut the wire here and put an inline fuse on the power. Obviously, you do not want to connect a pump or anything to a battery without having some kind of fuse, so that's what this is for here. I have some wire hide. You don't need to use this, obviously, if you don't want to. I just choose to use this to keep it a nice clean look. And then lastly, the preferred adhesive is 3M 5200. That's generally what I use. Of course, I just ran out of it, so I'm going to use some JB Quick, which also works. This is rated for fiberglass and plastic. I've used this in the past, and as long as you do surface prep, again, which is also needed for the 5200, you're not going to have any problems. So that's what I'm going to use here. And of course, lastly, we are also going to need some hole saw bits for the outlet on the pump. So this is a 3/4 inch, so I believe it's a 1 inch hole that I'm going to need to drill into the hole, but I'll double check that once we get to that process. So these are the materials that you are going to need. Now let me preface by saying that you can choose to install a switch if you want to. Some people prefer to use a switch so you can shut the system off completely, or choose to manually turn the pump on. Like I said, this is a 3-wire pump, which means it has a negative. Then it has an automatic wire, which is just using the built-in float, and then there is a manual wire where as soon as you provide 12 volts to it, the pump will kick on. I tend to not do the whole switch setup. It's just, you know, when you put a switch in, it's just another part that can fail. You can get corrosion on the wires, on the connections that go on the back of the switch. They can fail, they can bind up. I tend to just do it direct to battery with a fuse. The next thing is really just needing to know where you want to put the outlet on your ski. Now, generally, I run the bilge pump outlets in the front of the ski. That way, when you are riding, say 60 miles an hour or so, if the pump is pumping out water, you will see it when you're riding. The only downside to having a bilge outlet in the rear is, of course, if you're pumping water, you'll never know unless you're actually looking at it. that's what I do for my other skis. On this ski, since we have so much room in the back, and I've never had the opportunity of actually putting a bilge pump on one of these styles, I'm probably just going to put the outlet somewhere in this area. That's what a lot of people tend to do, so it'll either be here or on the inside or something like that, because that's where the bilge pump is going to be. It's going to be right down there. So let me start getting things cleaned up here, and then I'll show you basically what we need to do. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is remove this whole plastic thing in the back just to get some more room, because the hole does kind of go a little bit just like that, so we'll have plenty more room to work with this whole plastic thing removed. So not too bad, just some plastic pop rivets. We have a T30 on the back and a couple 10 millimeters that we need to remove to pull this up. And then the coolant tank will just kind of squeeze these tabs and it'll come right out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because we are going to be installing the bilge pump down there. That is the furthest point back. It just makes the most sense to put it there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, with all 7,000 bolts removed, we can go ahead and take that off and put it aside. So now you can see we have definitely far more room to work down here, and you can see it is quite a mess. There's a lot of crap on the bottom that we're gonna have to clean up, but that's no big deal. So what I'm gonna do next is kind of just move these hoses out of the way. I'm gonna disconnect the exhaust gas temperature sensor wire because that's also kind of in the way. The bilge pump is gonna be going right down in here. So as long as we have easy access down there, that's pretty much all we need. So you can move the extent of what you want. Realistically, you can kind of just do it just like this. The only reason I'm going to be moving hoses is so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, that's slightly better. So you can see the area where we're going to be installing the bilge pump, just this whole area down here, and it's quite dirty. So I'm going to take some shop rags and clean that up. We're also going to use some acetone to prep the surface, and a sanding block to kind of score the fiberglass. So I'm going to do all that prep work now, and I'll show you what it looks like once it's finished. It may not look like much, but that panel where I'm going to be installing the bilge pump is all clean now. I did score a little bit with a sanding block and also cleaned it up using some acetone. Now you want to check with the adhesive that you're going to be using to see if you can use rubbing alcohol or acetone. JB Quick can use either one, but if you are using 3M 5200, you do not want to clean the surface using rubbing alcohol, because it'll nullify the effect. So I pretty much just blanket use acetone for all cleaning and prep for any kind of adhesive, because it is compatible with the plastic if you have Polytech, or fiberglass if you're using a fiberglass ski. So now that this is all clean, I'm going to go ahead and kind of stage to see which way I want the bilge pump to look down there. So I'll get it dropped in and I'll show you which way I choose to go with. And here we go. So I have the hose attached as well, just so we can make sure clearance is going to work with the water box, and you can see it fits quite nicely in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take the pump back out. I'll prep the JB Quick, JB Weld, whatever, and then we'll go ahead and get the pump mounted in there. Now this is the quick setting stuff. It'll set in 15 minutes or so. I forget how long it takes to cure, but if you choose to use this stuff, make sure you have your placement down, because once you set it down, it's going to be very, very difficult to adjust it after the fact. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out, and we'll get that all set. By the way, guys, quick tip: if you have a automatic pump like this that has a built-in float, I've seen this mistake quite a bit. You want to make sure that when you're putting the adhesive on, that you're not putting a ton on here. Otherwise, when your float drops down, anything that makes it through is going to get stuck to your float, and then it'll keep it from lifting when you have water in there. So you only need a very small amount. You can put more towards the front here if you want, because there's no float there. But in the back, if you put a ton of adhesive, it's going to seep through and it'll get stuck to your float, and then people wonder why their bilge pumps don't work. So keep that tip as you will. Again, you do not need a ton of adhesive with this stuff. A very small amount goes a long way. It's very strong, especially 3M 5200. But just thought I'd put that out there, because I had quite a few people bring their bilge pumps after installing them because they can't figure out why they don't work. So That's it for that. I'm gonna go ahead and get this prepped, installed, and we'll move on to the next step. The pump is in place. I just checked, it takes about 6 minutes to get like tack free, so it should stay in place, and 4 to 6 hours to cure. So we can go ahead and move on to the next step. We just don't want to kind of pull on it or anything, because it'll kind of get it out of its resting place. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and figure out where I want to mount the outlet. This is the outlet here, so it's an angled one. I could put it on the inside here, or on the back face, or on the outside here. So not quite sure where I want to do it yet. I'm going to kind of mess around with a few different spots and see what I want to do. Here's what I decided on. I'm going to go ahead and put the outlet right in this kind of cavity right in the back. So this is the exact size of the pump outlet, and you can see it fits quite nicely right there. I checked on the inside. I do have enough clearance with the curve and everything to account for how far out this goes. So this should be a perfect spot. Now remember, generally on my skis, I like to have the outlet towards the front, just so that, you know, if I'm riding solo or whatever, I know water is being pumped out even at speed. This ski is a project. It's going to be primarily ridden by my fiance. It's her ski, and she's never going to be riding alone. She's always going to be riding in a group with us. So if there is any problems, I will be able to tell, but even then, it's not like she's going to be in a situation where she's out by herself. So I'm going to go ahead and use my hole saw bit. By the way, it is going to be a 1-inch hole saw bit if you are using the 3/4 outlet, which accounts for the threads. So I'll drill this spot out, and again, I'm using painter's tape just to kind of help the fiberglass from splitting and cracking off into a million places. So I'm going to drill this out. I'll use a shop vac to kind of clean it, and then we'll go ahead and hook up the outlet. There we go, all that lovely dust. So man, I have to say, I really miss how thick the holes were on these older skis. SeaDoo should really consider going back to some thicker fiberglass. I don't know if this is epoxy or poly, whatever the other side type of resin is, but these holes are definitely a lot stronger, certainly a lot more thick. So I'm going to go ahead and get this cleaned up, use the mini vac, and we'll get rid of all the dust. The hole's cut, so all we need to do is go ahead and put our outlet in, and then we'll just have to thread on the back plate from the inside, and then the outlet is done. I would say just make sure that you have the connector facing in a way that you can easily get to it to put your hose on. Now I do want to preface this by saying, if you are going to be doing a below the waterline bilge outlet, which is perfectly fine, anybody that says you should not do that, you know, don't listen to them. You can do a below the waterline bilge outlet if you choose to. In fact, that is what the factory upgradable electric bilge pump outlet does. You want to make sure that you have a loop on your bilge outlet, because if you have the pump, which is at a low point, going directly out to a side exit or rear exit, which is below the waterline, you're not going to have an air gap loop to prevent water from backfeeding in. Even if you have this is a backflow preventing outlet, you can see that there's a flap in there that does a very, very, very good job at keeping water from going back in. In fact, I will blow on it, and there's no air that comes out at all. But if you are below the waterline, you know, it doesn't take long for a siphon to get started. So make sure that if you're doing a below the waterline, you have some kind of high loop on here, just like the factory balers do, so you can zip tie this to a high point and then have your outlet going somewhere low. In this case, it's going to be above the waterline. It does not matter if we have a loop or not. In fact, you can even cut this to size. I may just keep a little bit extra in there. That way, if I need to move hose in the future, I can do so easily. But that's all besides the point. I'm going to go ahead and put on our back plate, and then I'll just go ahead and put our hose clamp and get this taken care of. All right, the last part is wiring. Now this tends to trip people up. This is where a lot of people get the most confused, because, you know, if you haven't worked with electronics before or any electricity, you may not be sure where to even start. But I assure you, it is a lot easier than you may think. So, like I said earlier, there are 3 wires on here. You have a white brown, and this is on the SeaFlo, by the way. If you use a different pump, obviously the colors may be different. The concept will be the same though. You have a black, which is your negative. That's always going to be the same. and then you have a solid brown. Now, according to the instructions, the solid brown is a manual wire, which means if you were to have the black connected to the negative post on the battery and the brown on the positive post of the wire, the pump is going to kick on regardless of whether or not the float is up or down. The automatic, which is the brown and white wire, will only kick on when the pump circuit is closed. So basically, that's the one we are going to use. We are going to ignore the brown wire. So what I'm going to do is kind of just cap this wire here because we are not going to use it. Realistically, you can just cut it. You can put some electrical tape on it, or which I usually prefer to use is liquid tape. Just put a dab of it and it'll seal it up nice and tight so no water can get to it. And then that's pretty much all we are going to do. Now, I mentioned earlier that for this, it doesn't really matter what gauge wire you use. I know there's going to be people that say, well, actually there is. Yes, if you're going to be concerned, you should look up a wire gauge chart. For this run, which is about 7 feet or so from the pump to the battery, it's about 6 feet, I'd say. So 18 gauge is what I'm going to use. If you want to go with a 16 or 14 gauge to be safe, you can also do that. I just would not go anything lower than 18. 20, 22, 24 is going to be way too thin. 18 is pretty much the sweet spot. If you're going to be going a little bit farther, you know, for example, if the battery was at the very, very front and the pump was at the very, very back, I would probably go down a step to a 16 gauge. But in this case, if you refer to a amp capacity chart, 18 gauge is perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do, because these wires are, you know, I would say these are, I don't know, 3 feet, 4 feet. They're obviously not going to go to the front where the battery is. I am going to crimp on the extension. I'm going to put like a 4-foot, 5-foot extension just so I have a little bit to play with. And we are going to send it to the front of the ski because the battery is up here on this model. So the first thing I'm going to do is just crimp on an extension, and then we'll go to the front of the ski to finish it up. The wires are crimped, and just like I said, I use this wire loom just to secure the wires. As you can see, it comes down and loops through here. Again, you do not need to use wire loom if you don't want to. I just kind of prefer it because it gives it a factory finished look when all is said and done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to find a path where I want to run these wires. I'll probably go across the top, across the fuel rail, just like the factory wire harness does. And then I'll find a clean way. There actually is some wires going to the right side of the air box there to run through and meet at the front where the battery is. And I'll light this up when we get up here. But first thing I'm going to do is just try to find a way to run the wire up to the battery. So here's where we are so far. This is the end of the loom, and here is our battery. So from the loom that we pull through, the black can connect directly to the negative terminal on the battery. We just have to put a ring terminal on it. But remember, the positive needs to have a fuse because we do not want to just wire an electronic straight to a battery with no fuse. So I'm going to pull back the wire loom just a tad to expose the wires that we need. I'm going to put a ring terminal on the negative, and then I'll do another butt connector from the red positive to one side of our fuse holder. And again, remember, we are just going to cut this right here. One side is going to go to the battery, the other side is going to go to our loom for the pump. Alright, I have the ring terminals on, I have the inline fuse holder connected, and I also have the ring terminal connected to the fuse holder as well. So the next thing we need to do is just go ahead and connect it to the battery. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the negative and the positive without connecting the fuse yet. And then once we are connected to the battery terminals, then I will go ahead and put in the fuse. So unfortunately, I won't be able to do a test today because we need to wait for this stuff to cure. Actually, I'll check and see. I'll see how long it takes, but I might spray out the inside and get it to hose out. So let me get those connected and I'll show you basically what the finished product looks like. And there we have it. Positive to positive, negative to negative. So that's it. The bilge pump is fully wired and plumbed in. Again, we're still waiting for it to dry. You definitely do not want to do this on a day you plan on riding, especially if you're going to be using 5200, which takes 24 to 48 hours or so. This is about a week after I finished it. We are doing a test right now. just filling up the bilge with some water to see it comes out of the bilge. Don't mind the other parts that are being removed. Obviously I'm filming additional projects with this, but I just wanted to show you what this looks like when it finally kicks on. So just stand by. Once this gets up, I will show you what it looks like. Is this the most ideal spot? Definitely not. Should have been more direct shooting out, but obviously now if your ski is taking on any water and it starts pumping, it'll be pretty obvious because you're going to get, I would say, decently wet from this thing. Now I'll answer a couple questions that always come up. One is, can you tie this into your fuse box? Yes, you can. The only thing is you really want to consider tapping into a empty fuse location if your ski has one that's constantly powered. So one of the benefits with a bilge pump is obviously if your ski is sitting in the water and you don't have the key in or anything, it'll start pumping out water if it's taking on water. The downside with the factory bilge pump that you can get an add-on, remember the ski does not come with a bilge pump. It comes with siphon bailers, which are completely different. That's not a pump. That'll use Venturi to suck out water through the jet pump. But SeaDoo does have a factory add-on electric bilge pump that will tap into the fuse box. The downside with doing it that way, with tapping into the fuse box, is that it only gets power whenever the key is on. So basically, if you are sitting on the beach or sitting at a dock and your ski's taking on water, unless you have your key in and the ski's sitting on, even in accessory mode, you're not going to be pumping out any water. So doing it this way, connecting it directly to your battery, ensures it doesn't matter if your key is connected or not, you are going to be pumping out water. Now, of course, people will say, what happens when your battery runs out? Well, it's not going to be any different from if your bilge pump is wired into the fuse box. At least this way you can start pumping out water, so if you happen to be standing by the ski, you'll notice that it's pumping out water. The other common question is, do you even need a bilge pump? And the answer is, that's up to you. It's just like insurance on a car. Obviously, I mean, most states, I'm pretty sure every state requires it, but the hope is that you'll never need to use it. But when you do need it, it's there. So if you're just going to rely on the siphon bailers, that's these guys here, again, these only work when the engine is running, then you're not going to get much suction of water out of the hole. It's certainly not going to keep up with a open spot. Like if one of your sponson bolts comes out, if your carbon seal starts to fail, if there's water coming in some other way, the Venturi bailers are not going to save you. These are really only good if you are, riding aggressively and you have water splashing in from the front or under the seat. That's all that's going to do. It's going to take out small amounts of water. But if your ski is actively sinking or taking on water in some other way, you can just completely disregard those Venturi bailers. They are not going to help you. You need to have some kind of bilge pump. Now, the benefit with the bilge pump, like I said on the other skis that I have, on skis that I do the bilge pump installs for, is if you have that outlet in the front, it gives you that heads up, because I'm sure any of you who have known when you take on water, you generally don't know you're taking on water until there's so much water in the back that it starts to feel like it's wobbly, or that your acceleration is lagging. You accelerate hard and the ski's kind of bouncing out of the water. And at that point, you already have 20 gallons or more of water in your ski. If you have a bilge pump and it pumps out of the front, the second you start taking on water, it's going to start pumping out. And that few second difference, that minute difference, can make a huge impact on whether you make it back to shore or if your ski completely sinks. Because, if you're out riding and you're riding along a shoreline and you don't notice your ski's taking on water until there's 20 or 30 gallons or so, and now it's basically just, you're really struggling to get up on plane. At that point, you have no option. You basically just have to shut the ski off, you have to let it sink, and it's just going to kind of bob in water until you get pulled back. But if you're riding and you see your bilge pump pumping out water, you know right away, I got to get back to land. And that's really where it kind of makes a huge impact. So that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions about the install, just leave a comment or send me an email, whatever, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.